Detransitioner Awareness Day, where we stand together to shine a light on several critical issues. The irreversible harm caused by gender transition procedures, especially on children, and a need for real accountability in our medical system. So despite attempts to brush aside or bury this subject, it has become a mainstream and galvanizing issue today. And the folks up here are proof of that. Now first, let me make something abundantly clear. We're not talking about denying care or compassion. We're talking about making sure our medical standards are ethical and evidence-based. We're talking about preventing dangerous, irreversible procedures from being performed, especially on impressionable, vulnerable minors. That's why I'll also be reintroducing the Children's Hospital Graduate Medical Education Support Reauthorization Act. So traditionally, GME funding has ensured that we invest in the next generation of pediatric doctors. That's a good thing, and it's still essential. But if passed, this would also include a simple common sense requirement. That would be, if children's hospitals want to receive federal funding for their residency training programs, they have to stop performing unscientific and destructive gender transition procedures on minors, full stop. Taxpayer dollars should not be flowing to institutions that are causing life-altering harm to kids in the name of an ideology. So I invite the rest of Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, to join me in standing for the simple principle that real care involves caution, ethics, and the best interests of children. We can and must protect the most vulnerable among us. We're standing for basic medical ethics and recognizing those who have been silenced and betrayed by a system that puts ideology ahead of genuine care. Medicine should be grounded in truth and healing, not in false promises that cause lasting harm. That's why Congresswoman Mary Miller and I will also introduce a resolution to make sure our colleagues understand the discrimination that detransitioners face and the work we need to do to help them. These are not small matters or side issues. Once a surgeon's scalpel or heavy dose hormone regimen changes a young body, you can't go back. Many detransitioners, some of whom you'll hear from today, were once told that there would be no regrets and no permanent risks. That was a lie. I want to thank each and every one of you here, especially those of you who've traveled across the country, to raise awareness. Your voices are courageous. By sharing your stories, you're letting people know that the harms are very real and that we as a society must do better. I'm going to introduce our speakers up here. Dr. Eithan Haim, medical professional who stood up for real science-based care and faced severe backlash for daring to challenge the status quo. Chloe Cole, a brave young woman whose journey through transition and detransition has exposed so many failures in our medical system and who refuses to stay silent despite relentless pushback. Dr. Jared Ross, pediatric specialist who recognizes the urgent need for stronger oversight and ethical guidelines in children's health care. Kathleen Dooley and Kurt Basili, both tireless advocates, each bringing personal insight into what it means to ensure kids are protected physically and psychologically from rushed and dangerous procedures. They'll speak to you in more detail about their firsthand experiences, the evidence that we can't ignore, and the concrete steps that we must take. So let's give each of these speakers the attention they deserve. And now please join me in welcoming our first, Kurt Basili.
Thank you, Representative Crenshaw. My name is Kurt Maselli. I am a physician, a psychiatrist by training, and I serve as medical director for Do No Harm, an organization that works to protect children from medical interventions that are harmful, like sex change procedures. Let me raise the question: should the American taxpayer fund hospitals that perform unsupported medical procedures on children, procedures which these children cannot consent, that cause substantial and irreversible harm? The answer should be obvious, and yet taxpayers currently fund graduate medical education programs at children's hospitals that perform sex change interventions on minors. These are some of the most prestigious hospitals in our country, yet they're also the same hospitals currently harming our country's children and training the next generation of physicians. That's why Representative Crenshaw's bill is so important. It incentivizes children's hospitals receiving federal funds for their residency programs to cease performing sex change interventions on minors. By ensuring federally funded graduate medical education programs at children's hospitals do not engage in these harmful practices, we can protect our country's children. We must hold our medical institutions accountable for sacrificing the health and well-being of our children at the altar of an ideology. There is simply no good evidence to support the practice and efficacy of so-called gender-affirming care. Review after review of the existing body of evidence has found it to be weak and unpersuasive. Instead, the research shows the transgender medicalization of minors causes enormous damage. Numerous European countries, United Kingdom, Finland, Sweden, they have all honestly investigated this issue, and they've imposed restrictions on minors' access to these dangerous procedures. We need to do the same, and cutting off federal funding where we can is an important step toward achieving this goal. I know we can do better. I know that we can embrace our children suffering from gender dysphoria and other mental health conditions and support them without irreversible physical and mental damage. I also know that we can train physicians to the highest ethical standards and scientific evidence. We can restore true quality and do so much better for our community. We hope to again look at our pediatric hospitals with great pride as they step away from this barbarism. We need to protect and restore the trust in our medical system, and especially with our patients. Thank you, Representative Crenshaw, and your colleagues as well, for working to get us one step closer to that day.
I'd introduce Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I'm Kathleen Dooley. I'm a mother. I'm a recovering attorney. I'm one of the original parents of the International GenSpect, as well as the East Coast Liaison for a parent support group that's in 32 countries, known as Our Duty. I am grateful to Congressman Crenshaw for working to protect our most vulnerable population, children, and for listening to us as we advocated for non-medicalized approach to gender-related distress. As an attorney and a board member of a tax-exempt organization called the Themis Resource Fund, Themis being the goddess of justice. If it sounds like a lot of words, just say TERF, those of you who get it. We provide funding for the detransitioner lawsuits. We were founded by a woman who lost her children to this ideology, and she has decided to pay it forward. We hope to continue to shutting down the trans machine. And we also recognize that these brave young adults need more than legal recourse as they navigate the difficult path to returning to themselves and reorienting themselves after they have endured unspeakable harms in the name of gender-affirming care, which is built, as you know, on a mountain of lies. They need laws to enable them to obtain the medical and therapeutic care that they need, insurance to cover the costs of the necessary treatments, and extended statutes of limitations to pursue those who grievously harmed them. Themis is recruiting attorneys and doing our best to connect the detransitioners to these law firms. We need more help. There are currently, as far as I'm aware, about 20 lawsuits across the country. And there should be more, and there can be more if we extend the statute of limitations. Many of these folks don't realize what has happened to them until they're beyond the 2 or 3 year statute of limitations for medical malpractice. We also need private causes of actions that don't just recognize the medical malpractice, but how about the fraud, the conspiracy to commit fraud, the unfair and deceptive trade practices? Yes. Even though this is a profession, let's face it, they're all making money. These medical associations are not respectable organizations looking out for their patients. They are looking so that their members can make money. And that's what this is all about.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce the brave Chloe Cole to the stage.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I am a detransitioned 20-year-old woman from California, as well as an advocate for the civil rights of children and their families. I have dedicated the first few years of my adult life to fighting against the medical system that took advantage of me and many of my detransition friends. Just 8 years ago, I was a little girl who was led to believe that her tomboyishness, her creativity, and unique qualities meant that she actually was a boy. That there was something fundamentally wrong with her. So she had to change into somebody who she wasn't. I entered my teenage years being given treatments to stunt my natural healthy development, starting with a chemical castration agent to disrupt my puberty and high doses of male sex hormones to make me look and sound like a young man. The final and most gruesome treatment that I received was a double mastectomy that I underwent at 15 years old, before I could drive. These feelings of deep discomfort did not come naturally. I had been bullied, I was isolated, sexually traumatized. I wanted to run away from myself. And rather than these adults giving me space, giving me time to just grow into myself, they facilitated this. They let me run away. It wasn't until after my breasts were ripped away from me forever that I realized that I was beautiful, not broken. There never was anything to fix in the first place. But because of the malicious ignorance of the adults who were supposed to help me and my family, I would bear the scars of their mistakes for life. And I am far from alone. There are hundreds of detransitioners who are public, but thousands more of us suffer in complete silence. Our scars tell a story that America needs to hear. That little boys and girls are being harmed in the name of healthcare. My story is just one thread of a generation unraveling under the weight of confusion and false promises. Generation Z has been sold an identity crisis packaged as freedom, leaving millions of us scrambling desperately for meaning in treatments, labels, and ideologies that betray us in the end. The scars that I carry represent more than medical malpractice. These are the scars of a generation that is in pain. My story is not about gender. It's a mirror that reflects the tragedy unfolding amongst Generation Z, who are being systematically detached from reality, our communities, and ourselves. I'm grateful that I have been able to transform the grief that I and my family went through together, to use it as a force for good. But there are still thousands of voiceless, confused children in the system who are being hurt every single day by 54 different major hospitals across the United States. Between 2019 and 2023, at least 13,000 sex change treatments were administered to children, and over half of those were surgeries. Thousands of breasts removed, penises cut off, vaginas inverted. Of children. That's thousands of boys and girls who are never going to be able to live normal adult lives. And yet this continues every single day. We all know that this atrocity that I and these many other children have survived must never happen to any other child ever again. These doctors who carelessly poison and butcher our children must be held accountable. These hospitals and clinics that ruin the lives of kids in the name of a radical ideology must be stopped now. The next generations need our protection immediately if we want to preserve our future as a sane and healthy country. This day is a painful and yet meaningful day for the young men and women like me. This is the biggest year for Detransition Awareness Day yet. This time we're asking Congress to protect children from the abuse that we once were subjected to. There is no better time than now to cut off every single penny of our taxpayer funds from ideologically captured hospitals that treat our children like lab experiments. Representative Crenshaw's bill is a continuation of Donald Trump's executive order to drain federal funding from predatory hospitals, and the logical next step in codifying it into law to ensure that our efforts to preserve the health and the innocence of our youth cannot be thrown away. Thank you, Representative, for recognizing the boys and girls like me who have been led astray, who have been irreversibly harmed by irresponsible, evil adults, and the need to stop this abusive medical system in its tracks. Because we need leadership from those who understand that children are beautiful just the way that God created them. Because when a culture teaches its kids that they aren't enough as they are, it doesn't liberate them. It sentences them to a lifetime of seeking solutions to problems that never were there in the first place. It is truly vindicating to see, in just the 3 years that I've been speaking out, that voices like mine really matter. That our suffering has not been in vain. We detrentioners are not going to go away. We are only going to get louder as the number of kids who have been abused grows. America's children are not experiments, and our hospitals are not laboratories. Enough is enough. Our fight does not end until Congress finally chooses to end the widespread destruction of innocence, and our children no longer have to grow up amongst this devastating identity crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe, for that incredibly powerful testimony. I'd also next like to introduce Dr. Eithan Haim.
So it's truly remarkable to be here today on Detrans Awareness Day. I mean, it was only a little bit over a month ago that my case was dismissed with prejudice. And for those who aren't familiar, I was a surgical resident at Baylor College of Medicine, which is affiliated with Texas Children's Hospital. And I was working there at the time that they were lying about shutting down their transgender program. They told the public one thing, that we're shutting down this program because of the legal ramifications. But what they do, they just continued it behind closed doors, right? They were inserting these puberty blockers into these children, 11, 12 years old. They were going to permanently alter the chemical composition of their bodies, prevent them from becoming the adults they were meant to be. They were starting them down this road to become chronic medical patients. And at some point down that road, they're going to look in the mirror and think to themselves, the people who were supposed to take care of me were the ones who had fed me to the wolves. And when I was in that situation as a surgical resident, I knew this was happening. I knew they were lying. I knew this was a big story. And what would I do? Would I stay silent like everyone else? Or would I blow the whistle? And yeah, it's stories like Chloe Cole's that gave me the meaning to put everything on the line to do what I did, to blow the whistle. And the day after our story came out, SB 14 was passed. It was made illegal in the state of Texas. I believe this has always been illegal, but that just reaffirmed that. Other whistleblowers came out. The AG announced an investigation into the hospital. About 10 days later, the CEO said he was going to shut down the program for good. So of course, it was under the Biden regime. So a month later, 2 armed federal agents show up to my home a few hours before the ceremony of my graduation, one of the most important days of my life. And after that, in the year and a half following that, I faced down 12 felonies in 3 indictments, up to 10 years in prison for a crime that they could not define, just for criticizing the government, for pointing out what they were doing. They tried to gag me. And when I spoke out in defiance of that fake, corrupt, de facto gag order, the day before my case was dismissed, the judge was trying to send me to jail. I had to sign an agreement that I never would have signed in order to make this judge happy. Luckily, the case was dismissed because Trump got elected. But there's something important there. How was all this able to happen in the hospital? How were they able to lie about it? Because the residency education program indoctrinates these people. You know, I have, one of the things I released in the original story was a Grand Rounds lecture. And they have a whole series of Grand Rounds lectures. All this is funded by ACGME funding. And when you look at all of them, there's maybe like 10, 15. These are the most radical lectures you could ever imagine about every possible left-wing idea that exists. And these are lectures meant for pediatricians at the world's biggest children's hospital. There was one lecture that started with a land acknowledgement. Right, in Texas. So when you go after the funding, right, the ideological superstructure that embeds itself within the minds of the pediatricians, the doctors, the surgeons in our country is going to be taken out. So that's what we have to do. We have to pass this bill so that these people can no longer ideologically sterilize and terrorize everyone in these programs. We have to bring truth and medicine back to what it's really meant for. So this bill is a good first step. So I want to thank Representative Crenshaw and everyone for being here, and all the detransitioners and Chloe Cole and everyone else. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for standing up for what's right under great personal duress. Last, I want to introduce Dr. Jared Ross.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jared Ross. I'm a board-certified physician and a senior fellow with Do No Harm, an organization that protects vulnerable minors from harmful gender medical interventions. This administration has made protecting children a day one priority. President Trump's executive order restricting funding was an amazing first step, but he cannot do it alone. Unfortunately, activist judges in Maryland and Washington State have temporarily enjoined the executive action. We need Congress to take action, and Representative Crenshaw's bill is an amazing first step, eliminating federal funding for these procedures. We need to continue to expand to a nationwide ban to protect all minors and ensure that detransitioners like Chloe Cole have their rights protected. The US followed misguided European researchers down this rabbit hole in the 1990s. And since then, gender confusion among children has become much more common, as high as 1% to 2% now. That's 100 times more common than when the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual version 5 was published in 2013. A recent study in JAMA Pediatrics showed that 1 in 1,000 minors in this country are on cross-sex hormones. Think about that. And we know that most, if not all, of these children suffering from gender distress have underlying health and mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, autism spectrum disorder, and unfortunately a history of physical and sexual trauma. We know that none of these supposed treatments that these radical ideologues purport, none of them address these underlying issues. In fact, so-called gender-affirming care is sold as a silver bullet, a cure-all for whatever ails these children. But the tides are starting to change. Sweden, Finland, Belgium, the UK, and more recently, Italy and Argentina have put in place bans or restrictions protecting children from these procedures. The American Society of Plastic Surgeons, the American College of Pediatricians, and the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons have all spoken out vocally against this. 26 US states have various forms of protection in place for minors. It is beyond time for a nationwide ban to protect children from sex change hormones and surgery. We are incredibly grateful to Representative Crenshaw by taking this crucial first step by reintroducing this bill to eliminate federal funding from these mutilative procedures.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you to all our courageous speakers. I think what you heard today is a couple things. One, the pseudoscience has been debunked thoroughly. There's multiple systematic reviews out now. There's a reason that these countries that were just mentioned have banned these procedures, because they're dangerous and the benefits are unclear at best, but the risks are massive. You also didn't hear me bashing Democrats today. We hope today is because we want to persuade. I hope that these testimonies today serve to persuade those on the other side of the aisle who, let's be honest, 5 minutes ago didn't believe this was a good thing, but have become caught up in an ideology. And it's this us versus them mentality, but it really shouldn't be. The science is very clear, and you know, I hope to foresee a future where we can actually get this passed, because we might maybe get some Democrats across the aisle, which is exactly what we would need to get that particular bill through. We would need Democrats in the Senate to cross the aisle to get 60 votes. I don't see any good reason why you vote against that. That's what we hope for today, is I think persuasion. Thank you so much. We'll take a couple of questions, but we went over time already, so just a couple, if that's okay.
What's the mechanism to identify offenders and enforce the law when you do have doctors that use the wrong billing codes in order to manipulate the paper trail?
Because you're talking about, yeah, what we've heard about as well, which is Medicaid fraud. You know, yeah, so they'll do things like code, like endocrine therapy, and it's a real problem. So, I mean, the enforcement mechanism is HHS itself, it's DOJ. That's going to require action from the administration. I mean, we make things against the law, okay? That's what Congress does. We can make it against the law. We are not the enforcement mechanism. That is up to the administration to do that, and if any administration is going to do it, it's going to be this one. So that's something we definitely need to look at.
Yes, Representative Crenshaw, Randy Walter, Christian Post. I'm curious to know, you say you want to persuade, the Democratic Party seems still to be very ideologically locked down. We heard this morning, Floyd was there, a couple of us were there, where a former Democrat in the state level in the state of Texas said that her fellow Democrats told her, we know what's wrong, just hold your nose. Are you hearing any chatter from your colleagues that they too know what's wrong, or are they still living in denial? And what do you think might finally puncture and sort of break this? Because it seems as though people know that they're just suppressing their conscience. And I'd also be curious to know your thoughts on this sort of gaslighting line that we hear so much. It's just a few people. It's just, they sort of minimize, it's just a few, when, you know, if you rewind 10 years, no one was thinking it was a good thing to cut the breasts off of one child. So speak to the minimization, and also if you think any of your colleagues on the left are.
Yeah, I mean, the minimization of it is criminal, just from an intellectual perspective. It's intellectually criminal. You know, I don't care if it's 1,000 or 1. It doesn't matter. The science is the science. The harm's the harm. It doesn't matter. You know, the numbers actually don't matter. Something should be illegal if the science backs that up, which it clearly does. And common sense. Common sense backs this up as well. As far as what they really think, you know, I get asked that question about a variety of issues. To include this one, no, it's look, I'm never going to get one of my colleagues to admit to me in person or even privately oftentimes that they know this, that they've gone down the wrong path. But I think what you're hearing is probably correct. I mean, it's you know, the Democrat Party is doing this introspection. Why do we lose the election so badly? And it's maybe because you're putting front and foremost these radical issues that everybody knows. I mean, the public knows just through common sense. They don't need to read the Cass systematic review. They know from common sense that this is wrong and harmful, especially for minors who just aren't ready to make those decisions yet. And look, all we can do, like what we do on every issue, is continue to do things like this, where we're showing them the human side of this. This isn't Dan Crenshaw just yelling at them. It is the human side of this, we're showing you the data, we're showing you the evidence. That eventually does, so that's the cultural battle. And then cultural battles turn into political battles because your own constituents start to call and start to demand a change. That's what will get them to listen, and I think that's what we hope to eventually do. That's why we're doing things like this. Okay, one more.
I'm Patrick Hunter, I'm a pediatrician, general pediatrician. I have to say this public, I'm a member of the Florida Board of Medicine, I'm not speaking for the state of Florida, I'm in trouble with my administration. I agree going after the children's hospitals is important, and I support what you're doing. Publicly, I think people need to be called out though, and I don't know what the role of congressional hearings might be specifically. We need to go all the way to the top. I'm not sure if you're aware, our former Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, Admiral Levine, interfered with the WPATH guidelines. And Chief of Staff contacted WPATH and asked for the age restrictions on children that were in the draft to be removed. The leadership of the AAP needs to be called. The leadership of WPATH needs to be called. And is there a role for congressional hearings to expose to the public the nefarious happenings that are going on behind the scenes?
We have. I mean, those particular organizations actually came out in hearings that we've had on energy and commerce when I famously asked, I think some doctor from Yale, I believe, just give me one study that shows this is a good idea. She said she had no answer. So we've done hearings on it. There'll be more hearings on it. There absolutely is that's why we're going to do a podcast after this. We're doing the press conference yes, you're right. You have to call out the specifics. That's what Dr. Haim did, right? He was punished for it, and now we're elevating that story. I think the winning momentum is on our side. We'll continue to call out every one of those organizations without fear. Thank you all so much for supporting our heroes up here, and thank you for being here.